Hey guys, welcome to video number 21. This video possibly could have been video number one, but I've waited till now to do a video defining Christian nationalism. This is kind of, in some ways, by request. Uh, I have already kind of done a post on my definition of Christian nationalism back in 2023. I did make a written statement on that a while ago, but I thought it would be helpful in the context of these videos, maybe just to do another video and define my own system here so that people understand what I'm arguing from and for and why. The first 20 videos, more or less, were attempting to address presuppositions that are brought to this discussion. There's certain theological presuppositions we bring, and kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, if you find that you've got a piece out of place, you don't just have one piece out of place, because the nature of a jigsaw puzzle is that if one's out of place, something else has to be out of place. And so I've been trying to address the underlying theological issues, sometimes unexamined, that we bring to the table. So having done that, I wanted to take a moment and just give kind of a little bit of a working definition of Christian nationalism. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit difficult, and I don't have a couple sentence definition for you, unfortunately. So it is what it is. Bear with me for a few minutes and we'll kind of walk through this. I think it's important to start out with saying that Christian nationalism was really a slur that started from the mainstream media. It was an attack on a worldview. It's a worldview attack, and it comes out of a worldview, right? So this really came out. I think 2021 is really the big year, right? January 6th, the events in DC was kind of the turning point in which mainstream media really began this frenzy of using the term white Christian nationalism. And the context in 2021 is that most of the world has, or the West has adopted this kind of CRT worldview, this critical theory that everything's about systems and power and control. And not only that, they are very much globalists. The idea that, this intelligentsia, these self-appointed experts, these elites, these kind of unelected individuals who are organized in organizations, that they should, through treaties and accords, undermine national sovereignty for the good of the global population. And so that's really the context. 2018, then President Trump, in a speech, had said, I'm a nationalist. And he then, within a couple of sentences, contrasted that with globalism. So he's a nationalist, not a globalist. And so what we're talking about then, when we talk about nationalism, is policy. We're talking about governmental policy as it relates to the nation, both internally, but also the nation's relationship to other nations. And so it stands in contrast with globalism, but it also stands in contrast with things like tribalism. So nationalism, and I point this out that it pertains to policy because it's part of the definition. You'll get the definition wrong if you don't get that right, but also because there's been some who've wanted to argue that we should identify according to patriotism rather than nationalism. But that confuses the issues, because patriotism, if you just Google, what's the difference between patriotism and nationalism, or reverse that, what's the difference between nationalism and patriotism? They'll always start with patriotism because that's the easy one. They all say it's a feeling. It's a love of your country, a love of your people. It's this patriotic sense. Well, that's not what nationalism is. Nationalism isn't really a feeling or the sense. It's policy. It's a ideological understanding of how our nation should relate, primarily to other nations and our nation's self-identity. How should we understand our national identity? So it's not, you can't have this. Well, you can it's patriotism or nationalism. You're talking apples and oranges. So Trump really says that he is a nationalist. and that's 2018. So 2021, we then have this explosion of white Christian nationalism. So they understand, nationalism as policy, as opposed to, globalism. We're trying to stand against the WHO and these other global groups that want to undermine national sovereignty, and they're adding two modifiers to nationalism: white and Christian. So Christian then is going to say that we're not a Muslim nation, we are not an atheistic nation, we're a Christian nation. So that's our identity: Christian purposes, Christian principles. So not only that, but then they have to add in white. And white, we obviously can't get into all the CRT type stuff, but white is differentiating one form of Christianity from another. Now, for Christians, we don't need to do this because for multiple reasons. But what they're doing when they call it white Christian nationalism is they're contrasting it with what would be kind of like the black church. So the black church, Democrat, right? Very pro-Democrat, which makes them pro-abortion. It's a very different moral, civil system. And so what they're saying by calling us white Christian nationalists is this conservative worldview. And so when you think about what's going on here, this is the definition I had written back a while ago for our Christian nationalist worldview. It's going to include things like, Genesis 1 through 3 is the truth. And so there's only male and female, right? And therefore, evolution is a lie. And not only is it a lie, it's a false religion because it's not really science, right? As observational sciences. So what that means is then our Declaration of Independence is in many ways a Christian document, right? That all men are created. There's a creator, obviously, and given rights by their creator. That's not a Muslim worldview or an atheistic worldview. That's a distinctively Christian worldview. There's a creator who gives rights to his creation, and then it's the job of the state to secure those rights. And so, Genesis 1 through 3, the fall, male and female, which means you can't have homosexual, what they call marriage. Not only can you not have that, but you obviously can't have any of the trans mania. But also then, because of the claims of who God is, right? Christ is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Psalm 2 calls all the kings and the judges to kiss the Son. And even if we pause there for a second, Psalm 2, according to a literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutic, back when that was written, 1000 BC, the king was the representative of God to that nation, right? He's the mediator of blessings from the God to the nation. He represents the nation's religion. So whatever the religion of the king is, that's going to be the religion of the nation. Not necessarily forced conversion, but that would be the idea, that the nation would be identified by the king's religion. That's the context in which Psalm 2 says for kings and judges to kiss the Son. It's a call to have civil leaders, civil magistrates, publicly in their official capacity acknowledge the one true God as God, and then for judges to rule and to legislate accordingly, according to his revelation. So that is the founding of our country, and it's a worldview. It's not atheistic. It's not humanistic. It's not Muslim or any of these other false religions. And so that means that there is no dichotomy between faith and politics, right? So politics is going to be done by people with a religious worldview, whether it's humanistic, whatever it is. And so not only that, then we have also other views such that God's made, certain spheres, right? So the family and the church and the state, that's bound up in our founding documents, that, there is this on the federal level. There's what we call the separation of church and state. Not that a text says that, but the implications are there on the federal level. However, when the First Amendment, is done, we had states that had state churches, we had states that had blasphemy laws, and we had states that had religious tests for office. So the original understanding was that at a federal level, you can't have that, but it's okay for states to have religious tests for office and blasphemy laws. You can legislate that it is not okay to blaspheme the one true God, the King of Kings. So that is the worldview that's being attacked as these, the mainstream media is calling us white Christian nationalists. That's the context in which I adopted the term. And I've pulled up just a couple of definitions here just to kind of maybe substantiate this. So this is NPR. And obviously, these are very short definitions that could be fleshed out. But NPR, in an article, Christian nationalism is a worldview that claims the U.S. is a Christian nation and that the country's laws should therefore be rooted in Christian values. This point of view has long been most prominent in white evangelical spaces, but lately it's been getting lip service in Republican ones too. So again, very clear, right? Christian nationalism, it's a worldview. This was a Christian nation, and therefore the laws should be rooted in Christian values. Yeah, so we're talking no abortion, we're talking no gay marriage, no transing of kids, things like that. Then we could move on to Christianity Today, kind of a funny name. It's more like Today's Christianity, which is a mile wide and an inch deep. It's surely not Christian, but, they defined it this way. And this is not a pro-Christian nationalism article. Christian nationalism is the belief that the American nation is defined by Christianity and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. Popularly, Christian nationalists assert that America is and must remain a Christian nation, not merely an observation about American history, but as a prescriptive program for what America must continue to be in the future. Scholars like Samuel Huntington have made a similar argument that America is defined by its Anglo-Protestant past. You see there's that kind of that white aspect. Anglo-Protestant past, and that we will lose our identity and our freedom if we do not preserve our cultural inheritance. Well, go to 2020 and tell me that's not true. If you abandon the Christian idea that it's God who grants and defines rights and the state who's entrusted with securing them, then what you have is what we had in 2020, where states think they can define rights. They can retract your rights. They can suspend your rights. They can determine if you have rights or not, right? Do you have the right to work? Do you have a right to keep your business open? Do you have a right to earn a living? Do you have a right to bodily autonomy such that you don't have to be injected with experimental, gene therapy in order to be a part of society? You abandon the Christian worldview that really is the foundation of our nation, and you're in for what we experienced in 2020. Let's see, I got a couple other definitions. Here's a Washington Post. They use the book that was written by Whitehead and Perry, and they define Christian nationalism as a cultural framework that blurs distinctions between Christian identity and American identity, viewing the two as closely related and seeking to enhance and preserve their union. And they would say that, yeah, not everybody, believes it that way exactly. But, if we were just to kind of distill it down, when I'm talking about Christian nationalism, I'm talking about nationalism as opposed to globalism. I'm talking about the Christian worldview that is the foundation of our government. I'm talking about things like Psalm 2, where God does call all the civil magistrates to publicly, in their official capacity, acknowledge the Lord Jesus Christ. And I would say it's exemplified even in our early American history. Not a perfect example, but a good example would be the Thanksgiving Declaration given by our first president, George Washington. So here we are, we're a couple weeks from Thanksgiving, and this Thanksgiving Proclamation of 1789. Here's what our president said, and I think this is a good model. He says, whereas it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God and to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and humbly to implore his protection and favor. And whereas both houses of Congress have, by their joint committee, requested me to recommend to the people of the United States a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of Almighty God. And he continues on, but there you have, as president, you have Washington saying, listen, it's the duty of all nations to acknowledge God and to be grateful for his benefits and to implore his protection and favor. So that is the version of Christian nationalism that I would ascribe to. And I would argue that if you abandon our history, if you abandon the foundation of this country, you're going to move towards globalism. You're going to move towards statism. And we're going to see what happened in 2020 with the revocation and suspension and redefinition of rights. We're going to see that really en masse. So hopefully that's helpful. Feel free to contact me or even put some comments down there if you want to interact a little bit more on this, if you want to disagree, anything of that nature. And hopefully I'll get a couple more comments out here. Or a couple more videos out in the next few days. Maybe before I end, maybe it would be helpful also to give a little bit of a timeline. I did intend to do this, and maybe sometimes I have notes, kind of rambling here, but let me give you a little bit of a timeline. It may also be helpful just to situate yourself. Here we are in the end of 2024. Again, Trump used this term in 2018, nationalist. 2021 is when the mainstream media really starts running with this term, right? White Christian nationalists. Well, 2020 is when statism roared its ugly head. That, for me, 2020 is when I began my own personal study of God and government, and that was basically a 7-day-a-week study for about 18 months. Because after 18 months, in late 2021, is when I began my series on God and government, which I did about 40 parts over the next 18 months or so. And so you've got March 2020, statism rears its head. You got January 2021 is when mainstream media really starts using this term. I start using the term also in 2021, particularly as we get to the end of the year in 2021. 2022 is when Stephen Wolfe's book comes out, The Case for Christian Nationalism. And I've made this point before, but I need to make it again. It's unfortunately so common for people to keep equating post-millennialism and Christian nationalism. And it's, I just saw it done this Saturday at a conference I was at by a pastor who's down in DC who just keeps doing this. And it's really funny because the most famous book on Christian nationalism is written by an amillennialist, a card-carrying Presbyterian. So it's a little bit silly to argue that Christian nationalism and postmillennialism are, linked together in some inseparable way when the most famous book is written by an Amill guy. So anyway, Wolfe's book comes out 2022, and by that point, I'm embracing that term. I'm arguing for that term. Also in 2022, Founders Ministries did a conference. Tom Askell and Vodi Bakum. These guys are, these are confessional Baptists. I think Vodi's a confessional guy. I'm not 100%, but definitely Baptists. And so they did a conference on Christian nationalism, and they basically said the same thing. Yeah, nationalism, not globalism, Christian nationalism, not atheistic or Mohammedistic, nationalism. And so that's late 2022. We're kind of all on the same page there. And then 2023 is when, I think about April of 2023 is when G3 kind of engaged their marketing arm, and which was really kind of sad because they kicked off a few articles, and one of them being the shades of Christian nationalism. And what was sad was they didn't even acknowledge, what Vodi and Tom had taught. And so you'd think with an article on the shades of Christian nationalism, they would acknowledge these men who are likewise Baptists and very, covenantal as well. Not only that, Vodi's been very involved with G3 over the years. So, they were trying to control the narrative. And they've even said, we don't want this term to be used against us. And so I've taken the opposite position. I've said, listen, we're not going to escape from this term, just like with the Christians who were first called Christians in Antioch. It was a slur. I think what's going to happen is when Trump returns to office, I think we're going to see this term come up again. And then it's going to force Christians to basically, say, listen, either I'm going to distance myself from Trump, or I'm going to distance myself from his policies. You're going to have to distance yourself from something. I don't think you're going to be able to get away from this name, this title, without also distancing yourself from a biblical worldview. I think it's going to be impossible. And so we should probably work towards further nuancing this title. I just don't think we're going to get away from it. I could be wrong. Hope I'm wrong. There probably are some better names than Christian nationalism, but that's maybe another topic for another time. So hope that's helpful. Enjoy.